Good morning. Hope everyone's having a good Monday. So today I'm going to look at some very, very important book. I would say if you have to have 100 books to read in your life, this would be on them. Um, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl was a psychoanalyst, kind of like Freud, not in the exact same school, but he was a psychoanalyst that actually endured the horrors of the Holocaust. Okay, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a very short book. I highly, highly recommend it. It's old enough and popular enough. You could probably get it on free from your library, free audiobooks on Hoopla or Overdrive. I highly recommend it. In any case, I'm going to say 5 insights for your life regarding that book. But if you're going to watch this video or read the book, read the book. It's great. Okay, so the short story is Viktor Frankl was somebody that had to go into these camps in Nazi Germany, and since he was already a psychoanalyst, he had nothing else to do except endure. But he made observations about humanity and how people lived and died and persevered in horrific circumstances. Okay, so I'm going to cover some of the things. First, man can heroically be resilient if they have firm meaning in place. So his psychoanalytical theory basically is about if you don't have a firm and concrete understanding of your own meaning, that's something in your own life, things to ground you. All kinds of different disorders stem from that. And I think that's very interesting. And there's an empirical aspect to it that part of this theory, even though he was developing this theory prior to his treatment in Nazi Germany, um, what he observed was some people, they just died. When horrible things happened, they just died. They collapsed from the inside. But on the other hand, some other people had almost identical physical things happen to them, but somehow they persevered. Okay, and part of that explanation he explains as their groundedness in meaning. Okay. 2, transcendence of tragedy requires a kind of indifference. Now, this one seems probably most obvious, but in the context of meaning, it's not just being callous. So we would expect, that the callous person, they persevere in some sense, but in a different sense, if you have a firm meaning that's grounded and in a way invincible, then no matter what happens, you don't lose heart. And these are kind of just words until you can really wrestle with what these things mean. But just imagine the most horrible things in your life. What would you think about? How would you endure? Um, but one thing is it's possible. Humans can do it, and that's one thing. And 2, this transcendence is something that, in a way, you can force yourself to do by what you focus on, what you ground yourself with. And that brings us to the next point. Responsibility and meaning are connected. Some people will try to take responsibility for what their life is and their decisions. And there'll be other ones that they don't try to take this type of responsibility in their decisions. And in one way, one is an example of being grounded, and the other one is an example of being groundless. Okay, and I think that makes sense. And this actually connects to my post about love. Your character and what you invest yourself in and what you stand on, these things are all related. And I think that's very fascinating. So when you are in some terrible scenario, what you choose to invest yourself in, what you choose to focus on and ground yourself in terms of meaning are very important. This next point, 4, the confrontation of fear allows the fear to be overcome. Now, this is another one that kind of sounds like something in some movie or something. You've all heard things like, well, master your fear or your fear will master you, things kind of like that. And maybe you haven't thought about it as, I guess, in a very practical sense, where you will face tragedy. This life is full of suffering. That doesn't mean it's only suffering, but if you confront things, and in Frankl's sense, he has something he calls paradoxical intention. Literally, you basically try to will what you are afraid of, in a sense of not just being okay with it. There is a type of surrender, but also finding a way to make it happen. He even talks about in his talk about logotherapy. Logotherapy is basically just his brand of therapy as a psychoanalyst. If you're trying to go to sleep, literally you'll try to not fall asleep, and in some ways it switches your mind around to focus on the thing that actually will help you, even though it paradoxically you're trying to do the opposite of what you want. But the idea is that you are trying to focus on one thing, knowing that your mind is kind of, trying to do the opposite. Okay, but if you really surrender to the fact that, hey, you will die or you will endure, you could focus on embracing what you're afraid of, and in some ways you're grounding yourself in meaning and responsibility, and you'll be able to endure. And in some ways you're not crushed. Okay, point 5. Humanity did create the gas chambers on the one hand, but it's also a fact that humans fight evil. They can endure through the most horrific things. So in some cases, you want to say, like if you're looking in America's history, it's like, oh, we're the country of racism. True, we are a country. Racism was in our history, but there's also the people that fought slavery the whole time. There were abolitionists from the very beginning of this country. So to focus on one without focusing on the other, that's just myopic. It's being too narrow. Yes, on this mortal coil, our human experience does involve suffering and evil, but you can take responsibility for your actions. You could be just amidst injustice. You could suffer with dignity. You could be a force of good. So no matter what, all of the horrible things in human history, you always find the examples of people fighting injustice, and that's fantastic. And not only that, and he says this is hard to explain here, but Frankl talks about giving the affirmative, the yes, no matter what. So if you think about horrible negative situations, it's kind of like a no. It's a no to existence, a no to what is good. But no matter what happens, you could say yes despite all of these sufferings. Okay, so the fact is, just to recap, man can be heroically resilient. Okay, they have a firm, grounded meaning. You can transcend tragedy because of that grounding. What you take responsibility for and embrace, this is what your meaning is, and what you take responsibility. These are connected things. So if you don't take responsibility and have your own identity connected to something that is deep and enduring, then when bad things happen, you just crumble. Okay. The confrontation of your fear, and this is a very real thing, not just like, imagine if that would be to happen. But imagine to will yourself to confront those things very actively. You'll have a different life. 5, even though we have a lot of suffering, there's a lot of evil in this world, it also has people fighting that evil. Okay, you take responsibility for what you pursue. If you pursue what is true and good and just, you could be true, good, and just to a great degree, no matter what's happening around you. Okay. Right, so 2 great quotes that Viktor Frankl has in his book. One is from Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. I think that's a great quote. If you have a why, okay, you can survive anyhow. Okay. And then also, he closes his book, man is a human being that did invent the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he's also the type of being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer or the Shema Yisrael on his lips. That's a very poignant, but also a deeply inspiring, um, I guess, showcase of what humans could be. In some cases, we could be the worst, but in some cases, we could also, despite the worst, transcend those things. We can endure. We could have a hope that cannot be taken away, and that is inspiring. Okay, so hopefully this wasn't a big downer. I do think this is an inspiring story that you could be a force for good. You can have a transcendent meaning, and I do believe that if you work on yourself, you will automatically affect the world, even if you're not trying. It will basically be a cup that's running over. If you continue to fill a cup, it's going to run over. In a way, you're not going to have a choice. If you develop yourself, if you develop a firm sense of what is good and right and just, and you become a virtuous person, if you become grounded in a very deep and good sense, you will affect the world, even if you don't say in the morning, I'm going to change the world today. Okay. So check out my website, commonphilosopher.com. Definitely go check out Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's a short book. It's free. You can go to Hoopla or Overdrive or to your library. There's no reason not to. It's one of those books that you can read it every few years. You would benefit from it. So I highly recommend it. So as we go forward to this week, let us all think about what is meaningful in our life. What is so good that no matter what the circumstances are, that we can turn our mind towards, so that we know what our life is about, what our identity is. Okay. You guys have a great week and a great day.